Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to our conversation. I'm Cullum Line. I'm the Youth Ministry Coordinator here at St. Anne's Parish. And with me, good sir.
I'm Father Matthew. I'm the pastor here at St. Anne's.
All right. We're a couple weeks now into the Easter season.
That's right, yeah.
We had some beautiful... Well, we had kind of a weird week. Like the last week, it was like really cold and miserable. Then it was like super gorgeous. And then it kind of snowed, but it didn't stick around.
Yep.
Which I know some of my family in Alberta got nailed with a blizzard. I know Regina got hit with a blizzard.
Wow. So we'll take what we had then.
Yeah. So that was my weekend, at least Saturday. I soaked up, like, I think I did 10 or 11 hours straight in the yard, just doing some yard work.
Oh, that's great.
Just doing the dad life, raking and dethatching, all these funny, lawn terms. And
No, it's important. I got a little bit. Saturday is usually my final homily writing day. I do the final polishing, editing, like writing through it and everything.
Yeah.
And I was doing it inside, and then I looked out the window, and I thought, I could be doing this outside. So a lot of the homily was on the back porch this week.
I did a little bit of that last week. I had a Zoom meeting, I think on Friday at like 3, and I've been in the office like all the day. And usually we have coffee at 3, and I was like, I'm taking my coffee, walking, and I took an early coffee break and walked around the park because I was like, I can't be inside the office like all day when it's like
you didn't invite us for an outdoor walking coffee. This is news to me.
Well, no one was around. Everyone was okay. Fridays sometimes is a ghost town a little bit, and then guys, people turn up. But it's nice to be able to sometimes take the work on the deck or get a little bit of the sunshine. So hopefully there's more of that coming for sure.
Hopefully, I'm pretty confident it'll come.
It's coming. Coming. It'll be good. How else did you spend your weekend? Were you? I guess you're back in school. You got another course kind of underway right now.
I started a paper on Monday and I finished it on Monday, which was not smart. Usually I'm a little more ahead, but this last week with going down to 30, I dropped everything else, and that's my excuse anyway to not get to it.
No, it's true. It's fair. We all have times and weeks when an inciting incident can just blow up your plans and change.
And
things.
It was due. I had to get in it was midnight Eastern, which is right now 10 o'clock Saskatchewan time. And I sent it in at 10:10. So we'll see if I get docked or not. The prof wants to be merciful or not.
I could maybe bug you that you had referenced this homework to be done, I think,
on Friday
morning coffee. But he implied he had some time. But I mean, yeah, you have your duties. You have masses and the homilies. And you had source on Friday. Which is great to still have that. And I think it was live streamed. It was one of those things where like we're done with live streaming. You can come back. Well, no, we'll go back to this. But
so Friday was the day we were put down to 30. There's actually some talk of and sources are adoration evening for those who don't know. There's talk of like, do we put it up on Thursday so we can still have bigger numbers, which I was very tempted for. But we had pastoral council and there's something else in the church, so we're not able to push it up
pivot at the last second. But we keep working with it, and I'm glad you persevered and gritted through. I can't lie, I've done that many times, powering through papers in a day. Some of them work. Well, maybe you probably are better at delivering in the last minute than me.
We'll see.
We'll see where it goes. Yeah. Stay tuned in a week or two for Father Matthew's marks. No,
I can do that. Oh boy,
I'll have a big reveal. No.
Speaking of Vainglory, I will talk about my marks on live stream or on our podcast.
There you go. Yeah, I was really excited. It sounds weird, but I was like, yeah, we're going to talk about the deadly sins? I was like, this is awesome. We were watching at home, so I was a little distracted in the preamble because when we're in our basement, it's like play area, so it's hard to contain the 1-year-old during the beginning of the homily. But and I just remember I asked you right before we recorded, I was like, post-Easter, it's a little interesting to dive into the 7 deadly sins. But I like kind of how you framed why are you going to go about it.
Yeah, so the idea is... And it's interesting. What started this actually is there's a book that came up in my psychology studies called Glittering Vices.
Oh, wow.
And it's a modern interpretation of the 7 deadly sins. And by modern, it's a contemporary author, but she dives a lot into a lot of the 7 deadly sins comes from the Desert Fathers, like from the first centuries of the church. And then some of the theologians of the Middle Ages, like Thomas Aquinas, did a lot of work on the 7 deadly sins. Mm-hmm. So he dives a lot into the history of the church, but then working it into present day. And I just find it really, really practical and true. And especially the idea of talking about, sin and Easter is kind of not what we would expect, but it's the focus I want it to be is freedom from these sins. And we're going to take a look at them, not to dwell on them, but to see what does it mean to be free of them, because that's an image of what God made us for, what God calls us to.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially like this is what Easter's all about.
It's being free of these things.
The series kind of in Lent was on freedom, right?
Yeah, so kind of in a way carrying that on.
So you're kind of building up from it. So, yeah, no, it's exciting to see where it goes. And so week 1, we dived into Vainglory. So it was so funny. Just the other day, some kid was quoting this song, "You're so vain," and we often don't use like the full like proper term.
You're so vainglorious.
It doesn't ring as well. But and I was just telling you earlier that I even just like using the proper term of vainglory because it helps understand itself. Actually,
and how does that help understand itself?
Because it's that idea that often for a lot of the 7 deadly sins for me is that the path to them seems well intended and can seem good until it's not good. Oh, do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
that's very fair.
It's like we'll dive into a little bit deeper of like this idea of being seen or being acclaimed for something, and it's like it's good to be seen and to be loved, but for whose benefit, right? For whose glory, and which was kind of the idea of the road to Emmaus here today, right? Is it about myself or is it about kind of their witness? And so I'll let you kind of tee that up. So I like that the glory is part of the vainglory because it's like it's kind of a self-examine, right? It's like, who am I bringing glory to, I guess? And
so you hit on a lot of things there. Maybe to pull back a little bit, first of all, in terms of like the 7 deadly sins in general. I like what you said about it. There are things often that are good until they're not good.
Yeah.
And the way that I tried to phrase it, and this is the point I want to make a lot through this series, is that so many of these sins they come from legitimate desires wrongly pursued. And I'm going to, I think, use that phrase a lot as we go through this.
Yeah, I like that.
And maybe one last word, too, because I had a lot of questions of people saying, I've never heard of vainglory as one of the 7 deadly sins. And I contrasted it with pride. And this is the thing actually I learned from this book I'm reading, The Glorious or Glittering Vices, is that there's different, if you look in the history of the church, there are slightly different lists of the 7 deadly sins. And this author is following St. Thomas Aquinas, who's usually a good person to trust on these things.
He was a smart dude.
And his take on it, because usually the debate is pride one of the 7 deadly sins or not? And if pride is, then usually pride bumps out vainglory. Or vainglory seen as kind of a subspecies of pride, that sort of thing. But St. Thomas Aquinas' take on it is pride is kind of its own character. It is like the super deadly sin. And pride is seen as being the root of all of these 7, essentially. And then for that reason, then vainglory gets its own 7 deadly sin, I suppose. But I think what I find so wise about these 7 deadly sins, and it is something it's been developed through our spiritual tradition for at least about 1,000 years of development from the early church up to St. Thomas, that used to sort of run with it since, I think we could say, is they do hit on some of these deep drives that we have. And they are like deep, legitimate needs that have a way of getting twisted. So I think acknowledging these needs in ourselves and then how we respond to them well and how we respond to them not well can really help in understanding the more practical, active sins that we do. And also seeing where God's grace can work in us and heal us and free us.
Yeah, it's I'm really excited for this series, and you kind of teeing it up well like that is because I'll be honest, some of my experience growing up and being formed in the faith was sometimes it's pride is the root of all evil. That phrase is there, and the deadly sins. It's like, watch out, they're gonna get you. Yeah. it's almost like the soundtrack to the deadly sins. It's like they're hiding around the corner and they're gonna ruin your life if you're not careful. So as opposed to something that it's like that we kind of control, right? That it sprouts up from within us.
Yeah.
It's less terrifying to be honest in some sense because it's like, well, I play a certain role in this.
We have our own like agency in it. We're not just passive victims of the sins coming at us.
I like that word a lot. And the other just kind of starter feeling a little bit I have as you kind of teed this up was kind of just heartbreaking. It's the word that kind of comes to me is when you said that, the hunger for legitimate desire, right? This idea of like to be seen, to be known, to be loved.
That's a legitimate desire.
It's a legitimate desire.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking that sometimes people, myself included, go to these extents to have those desires met, right? Is that a broader failing, a personal failing, that how many of these needs are going unmet.
Yeah. And that's another point that I plan to get to as I go through this, is to help people see that when we look at these 7 deadly sins, it's sometimes, in some ways, it's less a view of our badness, but it's about our brokenness. And our hurt is often where these come from. Yeah. And so about that, so you're right. Vainglory is the excessive desire to be seen and known and loved. Like, the fact that we fall into that means, like, that legitimate desire is not being met, right? We're not. And a big part of that, I think, that I didn't get into a whole lot in the homily, is the whole social media world. Because you could see that as a real temptation for vainglory, I suppose.
I mean, it's the... Yeah, I don't want to trash social media too much as we,
but it's a real it's a real risk.
Yeah, as we stream this on Facebook and YouTube. But I mean, we think of more ones of specifically a lot of it like on Instagram, Snapchat, even TikTok, and there's a lot of
all the ones that we're not using. Those are going to rag on.
I'm on Instagram. There's a St. Anne's TikTok that I put one video. I think, well, for youth, I did one like last year, and I was like, I don't know what this is. I'll maybe loop back next year when I get back in the schools. So the teens can tell me what I'm doing.
Great,
but. It is this idea of like, and there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of joy in that too. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's so obvious that a lot of it is just cries to be seen, right? Mm-hmm. Or to raise ourselves over another, right? Like literally just the definition of vainglory, right? Is to say like, behold myself, behold how famous I am or how much influence I have. And so I like that you literally, to help break it down, that, the idea of you talking about to be a good priest and to be seen as a good priest, and then you brought in this idea of LeBron James, right? And his influence, and we didn't throw him under the mud, but that idea of like how easy it could be for someone of his stature potentially, right?
Yeah, and just to remind people what we're talking about here, I used the example first of myself as a priest and the desire to be seen to be a good priest, and it's definitely there. And part of where that can really lead me wrong, I know, is am I going to do the things that it takes to be a good priest, or the things that it takes to be seen to be a good priest? And those are, they can sometimes look the same, but they're not the same. And then in terms of LeBron James, to be clear, I don't think that he is vainglorious at all, but just think of someone who's in his position. You can imagine someone in that position being a great basketball player and loving that he's a great basketball player is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But then where vainglory can slip in is if he were to start playing not for the beauty of the game, but for recognition from fans, and to seek joy and validation in the recognition that he gets or doesn't get. And so there, I think just with that example, we start to see just how something that's so beautiful can begin to be twisted. Mm-hmm. And just kind of how sad and empty it can become, too, if we really were to give into it.
Yeah, and it's just a good examine of getting to the heart, right? Because like you could be doing the same action, but what's your intent? Like, what's the desired result you want from this action?
Yeah, and that's maybe a good way, because we're trying to think too, how do we, like, if someone were to ask me, like, how do I tell if I'm doing this in a vainglorious way or not? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of it is that the desire, the intent. Am I doing it just for the joy of the thing and just celebrating it, or how much of my mind is thinking about, well, how is this going to look? How's this going to be taken?
Yeah, and I mean, I can think of so many examples in my own life or in ministry life as well. It's like, okay, am I running this junior youth program and doing this thing because like I want these kids to know Jesus, mm-hmm. or I want the parent to say, thanks for doing this for my kid? Like, I'd like to hear those affirmations, but I hope I'm not running junior youth to get that affirmation, right? And that's maybe because it seems simple enough, but I guarantee there's been times in like a couple decades in the gig that it's like, I'm going to kill this event, and really do the best I can because I want to get the props, right? Because I feel, and often, to go back to it, when I've sometimes caught myself in that, is usually because there's been an unmet need, right? I haven't felt maybe seen or my work appreciated or affirmed, and so sometimes you then put yourself out there or do this effort, right? Seeking it, right? As opposed to saying, well, no, this is my mission and my calling, and, I'm going to be faithful to that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I often think about this when I think about the opposite of vainglory. I think of kids. Kids are so like wanting to be seen doing things, but I find not in a vainglorious way, just in a joyful way. Like there was a little kid at church the other day who had a T-shirt of a Tyrannosaurus Rex going camping, and he was so excited about this shirt. He wanted to show me his shirt, And there is a bit like, look at me, look at this. But it's from joy and love of the goodness of life. And the thing we want to celebrate. Or a kid has learned to play Mary Had a Little Lamb on piano and wants to show it to you. And it's not a showing off, but it's look at the joy of the skill that I have and the joy of music.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
where is the joy coming from is maybe a big part of the vainglory question.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good example. I just think of like the gazillion times in my life when my kid brings me up like, look at this rock that I found, or we were having the debate of the abstract art that we found on the altar. Did we talk about that last week on the podcast? So the little artwork and then kind of debating and sharing is that sometimes people just give stuff like, my kid is like, look what I created, or
maybe so people know what we're talking about there. So it was last Tuesday, actually, a week ago today. I came in for Mass on Tuesday, and sitting on the altar there's a white piece of paper with a drawing on it, and it was kind of a green face with some bumps on it, and I called it a Baby Yoda. We don't know where it came from, but it was a bit of art that showed up on the altar. It was not there Sunday evening when I left, but was there Tuesday morning, and we haven't solved the mystery yet.
Yeah, and I mean, how much do we love like the Pew Art section, right? Or Patty having those different, the quilt, or those different interactions for the kids of like the artwork, and that is they just want to be seen, and I love that we try to do something in the parish to say like we want the efforts in our children to be seen and known, that this parish recognizes and sees them, and even as a parent, like I was crumpy this morning and didn't have my coffee yet and just didn't sleep well, and no excuse, but like was not my best self from minute one today. Yeah, and then had a little interaction with my daughter, and then I was like, I just got to simmer down, and then noticing her practicing, and I could tell that she was proud of what she had accomplished, right? And she came up and she kind of like announced to my wife who was coming up and refilling her coffee cup, and she said, "Mom, listen," and then played the song, and I was like, it wasn't Vainglory. What it was her like to say, look at this beauty, right? That I've helped create and to be seen and for it to be appreciated and to share it, right? It was an honest thing of you want to share what is good, and I love that, and it was a good little reminder. But it's also a check of me of like, she asked for my wife to listen, not to me. Which was kind of my examination, and part of that was because of my disposition maybe that morning. She didn't think I wanted to hear or appreciate it, which I did and loved, and so then I had to kind of reconcile that moment. But no, thanks for that. So I think it's a good point to hit on here, is that if we want to know if I'm acting in vainglory, it's where is the joy coming from? And is it joy in the goodness of the thing? And even the goodness of the gifts that I have, but seeing joy in that, just in itself. Yeah. And that maybe brings us to then the point of witness. Because I did want to tie these two together, of freedom from sin and how freedom from sin frees us to share our faith. And so use the example of the gospel today, which is the disciples have gone to Emmaus, they met Jesus there, and then they rush back to share what they've seen. And I laid out the two ways, the way that they did it, which was not with vainglory, and the way they could have done it with vainglory. So the way they did it, of course, is just sharing the joy of what God has done. That Jesus is alive, this is beautiful, we've seen him, this is wonderful. And they're sharing it with joy. But then we could imagine them going, but finding joy not in what God has done, but on the fact that, in a way, Jesus came to us and not them. And won't these guys be impressed with the story that we have to share? And what are they going to say? How are they going to feel? And I mean, that rings true for me in a dangerous way, I think, of the taking joy not just in the great things God has done, but in the fact that like my role getting attention for it, which is where vainglory slips in. Or sometimes it's coming to mind to me is the opportunity being confused with privilege. Like I get to be in this place, look at me, that I get to witness that, and I actually really love, and I'm thankful that a little bit in youth ministry in my world is very much a seed planting ministry. You don't always see the transformation or what the Lord does in the short term. Often you do, but typically it's a long term game you're playing, and I love that. I know that can be a struggle, but for me, it's like, because that actively protects me from vainglory, right? It's like, I don't like to be too intricately connected, right, to what God's doing in their lives. I was like, like I just put the cookies out and invited a kid, and like the Lord do, because I know I'm very susceptible to it, right?
Right.
So I like when someone loops around in 5-10 years and then says, hey, this was a big moment in my life, and I was oblivious to it. And I was like,
and then you can rejoice in what God did.
Yeah, because then I'm like, okay, 100% that was God, right?
Yeah.
But then on the opposite side of that, of getting back to this witness, is I think because of that is sometimes I stay away or I stay on the fringes because I'm nervous I'm going to fall into vainglory, that maybe I don't actively.
There's a hesitancy in sharing.
Yeah, there's a hesitancy, hard to get that word out today, to witness. Because I'm afraid I'm going to get it wrong, right?
Yeah.
Then I'm not going to.
Or maybe like we've seen it done wrong, and we think, well, I don't want to be that. But then instead of trying to do it right, we just don't do it at all.
Yeah,
it's another danger.
So, question for you on that front, because I think there's people probably listening or watching. They're like, yeah, I've been there. How do we protect from that? How would you maybe? What mindset or what kind of prayer? Or what maybe can we do to not be so hesitant and to feel confident that we're not?
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing is, like, taking really practically this example of sharing faith and doing it with and without vainglory. I would say to someone, if you're even asking the question, you're much less likely to do it. Like, if you're aware of the risk of sharing faith with vainglory, then already you're in a better spot, I think. So that's the first part.
Yeah.
And then kind of what you said as well, that, like, rejoicing in the fruit when you see it, but not, being dependent on that. Right? Like, fundamentally, like, rejoicing in sharing the great things that God has done, right? And that's where the joy is coming from. That's where the motivation is. Then that's what it ought to be.
Yeah.
But if you start to do it thinking about how I look doing it, and another thing I was thinking I didn't get to in this homily is there can sometimes be, it's in the faith, almost a martyrdom complex where sometimes I see people almost like wanting to be oppressed or to be opposed or to be put down. And I worry too there that there's maybe some vainglory in that too, potentially, of the worry of, like, that's how I know I'm doing things well if someone is coming at me for it. But again, the joy is in sharing the message. Like, that's what should drive us.
Yeah.
Not in how we're received.
That's interesting. I think that's a juicy little meatball, maybe for another time, but this idea of where it's like, take up your cross and follow me. That sometimes maybe do we not think or believe what the cross is the Lord gives us, that we kind of seek out our own cross.
Yeah,
To say, this is the way that I'm going to feel persecuted or crushed, as opposed to just, not trusting, but the Lord is like, the Lord knows your life is hard or things are coming or this, that, that we try to, create our own situation. Right. And,
right.
I mean, there is often this idea of, there is a battle going on. But not everything necessarily needs to be a battle or to be difficult,
we shouldn't be surprised when it comes, but we shouldn't be seeking it out.
Yeah.
Our motivation should be to share the gospel.
Yeah,
That's it.
100%. And there was something you said there that I wanted to loop back. Well, if the Lord wants it, he'll bring it back. Oh, in terms of this idea of like ways to protect or help with the witness, is when it does loop back, I don't know where someone was a witness or example to me, because sometimes I struggle with that, of like, what do you say or how do you do that doesn't make it seem like it's about you or this.
When someone comes back and says that thing you said 5 years ago.
Or just say thanks for being in there. And I'm very hyper aware that I can become prideful, right? So I get very nervous about that.
Yeah.
And so it was somebody's example, and they know who they are, is they just always would respond to like things like that, or someone that was affirming them, of just saying, praise God. God is good.
Yeah.
And it just really struck me. And I was like, praise God, because it's the work of God.
Yeah.
Right? Not praise myself,
Yeah.
And going back to this Father Michael Schmidt's The Bible in a Year thing, the thing that I loved was the tribes of Israel, right? And it's like Judah goes first, right? That praise goes first.
Oh, yeah. Praising God first.
Yeah, praising
Another
God
thing I
first,
try to do in those moments too is to affirm the goodness of the other person. Like, I don't want to just to say thank you, right? When someone gives you that comment, like, thank you, praise God.
Yeah.
I say, because I don't want to dismiss because someone is doing a real act of love by letting you know the good thing you've done for them. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess with that is to receive the gift too.
Yeah.
Right. Because sometimes that's the Lord trying to give blessing or affirmation to you in your own life or whatever it is. But also when we're witnessing and the experience of when that comes back or loop around, it often takes a lot of courage and strength on the other person's behalf to sometimes point out to, remark of how the Lord worked in their life. You know, so affirming that to say, wow, that's amazing that you noticed how God moved, right? That's a beautiful thing too. Yeah.
And that brings us, well, I think, to the last thing we want to talk about here is some tools to build freedom from vainglory. And I gave 3, but then you made a point that I really liked as well. So maybe I'll go quickly through the 3 and then open up for you.
Yeah.
Because my 3 were a little bit more on the individual side. And as at first, and this is kind of a freedom for every sin, is silence in terms of rooting ourselves in prayer. Like knowing ourselves, loving God, loved by God, like knowing that deeply. And then the second point I thought was to really see people, to see them well, like to look to them, to see their needs, their struggles, their joys, their gifts, their beauty, to recognize that, to be aware of that and the great things God is doing. And then in that silence and seeing, then begin to speak. But to speak really, like you were saying, like acknowledging for people the good things that you see, the good things that God is doing, right? To speak that praise and recognition for other people. But then you had brought up the idea of how we as a community can help all of one another not be tempted to this sin of vainglory.
Yeah, and as you just went through that there, I was like, well, it's the same thing. It's just on the corporate level, just bringing that all together, and it goes back to my kind of beginning disposition as you brought the series of the idea of heartbreak a little bit of, wow, there's so many needs that are not being met, right? There's so many people that are hurt or feeling isolated or unheard or unloved. And
so people are giving into vainglory. It's a sign that they are not being seen and known and loved.
Yeah.
And we as a community are not maybe seeing or knowing and loving as we should.
That's our personal responsibility, but then sometimes we know that we work more effectively together, right? So how are we examining ourselves as a family, as parents together as a unit? How well are we seeing and loving, and hearing our kids, right? As a faith community, how well, do we see, and know and love all those in our parish boundary, right? You don't have to be a registered parishioner to be seen and loved by St. Anne's, right? The Muslim who lives across the street is part of our responsibility to love and to cherish, right? And how do we do that? How do we think about that? And so maybe that's kind of my challenge, and that comes from maybe my old work when I was at the diocese, kind of on the bigger level, and I would do some training at parishes to kind of say, like, do you know the teenagers in your parish? Like, and I could say that I don't know everyone here. Like, it takes a while. COVID has made it a bit harder. But that is part of the thing of, like, do you even know them? Like, you're talking about, we need to do stuff for teens and this and their needs. I was like, do you even know their names? Right? And this is in smaller towns when there's only like 10 of them. I was like, you should be able to do this, right? Or whatever. But it's that idea, right? Are we asking those questions? And then, the idea of, like, taking that to prayer. So it's the same 3, right? Is there silence? Is there time of prayer so that the Lord can speak into our hearts and open our minds and our, and our hearts and our eyes to see the needs in our community, and then, that we would see it and then we would speak it and we would speak the need for it. And, and that leads to actions, right? Of the strategies. I loved when I was even, applying for this job a couple of years ago, your strategic plan and values. And I was like, youth was listed as one. I was like, well, that's one battle I don't have to face. Like, that's awesome. Right. And that's a good example for me. I was like, wow, this parish is committed to seeing them and to loving them, right? We're not always going to do it perfectly, but we know we try. Important, right? And I mean, all aspects of, and all ages, not just youth. So one way maybe that we can help all of ourselves as a community, as faith communities, everybody that we know, to not have to fall into the sin of vainglory is just to be affirming with one another, to be seeing one another and speaking the beauty and the goodness that we see. Yeah. It's a good challenge.
Yeah.
I think we could probably drop it there.
That's a great Easter resolution. How about that for this
There you
week?
go. And I like I say with the teens all the time is like, start with one. Like, you can continue that through, but it's like in the next week, like, what's like one person, one opportunity, and get that one done and then move on, right? Is, the Lord still has people moving and working in your life that need to be seen and loved, and you can do something about it. We can all do something about it. And I'm excited. What's what's next? Or we got to tune in next week to
That's
figure
this
out.
afternoon. I'll be
Okay.
working on that one.
Excited. So 1 down, 6 to go.
There you go.
We're excited to see what happens. So until next time, be well. God bless you, and affirm those around you.
Amen.